Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. We're so glad you could attend. Come inside, come inside.
Welcome back to The Price of Business. I am your host, Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business. Going to go straight to my friend Walter Rogers, who I know has a great guest lined up. How are you, Walter?
Hey, I'm doing great, Kevin. I'm here in beautiful Palo Alto today. Just super excited to be on the show today as normal. It's my favorite time of the week, as you know. And, today we've got just a phenomenal guest and a really interesting topic. We put the article on the website, so I'm sure you've had a chance to review that. And really the topic is going to be focused on this notion of the paradigm between B2B, and which is business to business, and business to consumer marketing, really breaking down. And for many, many years, of course, marketers have thought that the two approaches are drastically different. But at the end of the day, businesses are selling to individual buyers. And whether they're a consumer or a business, you're still having to appeal to the needs, wants, interests, and desires of an individual buyer. And so in our normal method, we went out to the marketplace to look for individuals that are really passionate and have best practices around this topic. And we've got Jonathan Becher online with us today. He's the Executive Vice President of Marketing for SAP. And Jonathan, welcome to the show. And tell us, who is SAP?
Walter, thanks for having me on the show. Kevin, thanks to you as well. SAP provides software that helps improve business processes for more than 100,000 companies around the world. We work with the largest companies on the planet, but we actually work with really small companies as well. To give you a sense of our scale and who we work with, our customers build 32,000 car engines every day. They also produce 2.5 billion utility bills every year, so sorry for the utility bill side. We're also involved in producing 65% of the world's chocolate production and 75% of the beer. So maybe a life without SAP would have less beer and less chocolate. Not very good, I would guess.
No, we definitely want the beer and the chocolate. That would be a very disappointing to not have access to those, or at least to have substandard beer and chocolate. Now, you mentioned business process. What does that mean to you, Jonathan?
Yeah, so I think of business process as a kind of a swim lane of a business. What do I mean by that? Imagine that you're in a company and your job is to deal with the financial part. A business process might be, how do you convert an order, somebody wants to buy something from you, to cash, to actually collect the money for them. So we call that process order to cash. And if you're a software person or if you've got that background, you know that involves order processing, accounts receivable, but you don't really care what the software involved is. You just want to go from an order to cash. If you're an HR person, your process might be from hire to retire, or maybe, unfortunately, sometimes from hire to fire, but we'll stick with the more positive one. And one of the things that makes SAP unique in the software industry is we do this by your industry. So if you're a retailer, we have special purpose processes for you. Imagine you're a retailer and you sell shirts or sweaters. Then you might have a process that goes from a sheep, bah, to a sweater. That's the manufacturing process. Another process that goes from the sweater to the shelf, and another process that goes from the shelf to the scanner so someone can buy it. One of the cool things about SAP is all those three separate processes are guaranteed to fit together. So that's what a business process is.
So that's fascinating. So the company has really focused not only on building software, but on specializing that software in such a way that it fits very specific industry processes. Is that what you mean?
That's exactly right. That's so that you don't have to do the work yourself, but we've used the experience from our collective 100,000-plus customers to figure out some of the, here's the word we use, best practices that work in retail or work in public sector or work in oil and gas or work in your industry. And you don't have to use those exactly, but you can start from them and personalize them as you'd like.
So given that, SAP, clearly, a world leader in its segment, has traditionally catered to, large businesses, medium businesses. What is your perspective then on this whole notion of B2B and B2C, that paradigm, that divide really going away? Because I would suspect most of our listeners think of SAP as a company where, you sell to the chief information officer and that's about it. But give us your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so Walter, I think, as you sort of hinted in your intro, I think the distinction is somewhat arbitrary today and doesn't make any sense in a few years from now. I think the mentality comes from the idea that companies like SAP that sell enterprise software, as it's sometimes called, as opposed to desktop software, typically sold it, as you said, to the IT department, to the CIO, on behalf of the end users. So the CIO said, yeah, I surveyed my end users, I know what they want, and I'll negotiate with the large company and figure out what it is. And so since we dealt mostly with one person or a small number of people, we could say, well, we were selling to a company, and that's where the idea of business to business came on. But in fact, it was always true that there were individual people that were using the software, that were getting value at it. They used it in lots of different ways. One person would use one piece, another person would use another piece, depending on whether you were a business process caring about HR, about finance, about marketing, or something else. What's happened over the last couple of years, and I see this pace accelerating, is there's new ways that software is being used. So one of the things that's really popular that I'm sure your listeners have heard about is something called on-demand, or sometimes people call that software as a service. This is a big segment that SAP is in as well, where you don't actually have to worry about the IT infrastructure. You just use the little bit that you want that's hosted on somebody else's software. Also, we've used a lot of software in our personal lives, things like LinkedIn or Facebook, or maybe some of your listeners use Twitter even, and the ideas on the consumer side have influenced the ideas on the enterprise side. There's a phrase that's called the consumerization of software. What that means is individual departments, frankly, even individual people, are now out looking for software that fits their specific needs and not necessarily aggregating through the CIO, through the IT person. They're going to say, no, I want what I want because I do what I want in my personal life. Why won't I do what I want in my work life? There's obviously a little bit of danger there, which if it's completely uncoordinated, completely chaotic, then you get, 18,000 different applications all doing slightly different things. And so one of the things that helps SAP is we can do it both the enterprise way or the individual, I'm only willing to pay $50 a month way as well, and make sure they work together.
Let me interject real quick. I'm curious, because when people talk about big business, small business, medium business, and that type of thing, means different things to different people. Kind of give us the range of the sizes of companies that you deal with in both dollars and in number of people.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do so, Kevin. So the range of what we look at is we work with the largest companies on the planet, the Fortune 10, et cetera, those that are making billions of dollars and have hundreds of thousands of employees. Those are SAP's customers. But we also have products that appeal to what I'll call mom-and-pop shops, those that are doing even under a few million dollars, I said euros, sorry, I was in Europe last week, a year, and may only have, tens of employees. So both ends of the scales of work. The important thing is we don't force both kinds of companies to use the same physical software because they have different needs, but they enjoy the same business process. Because no matter whether you're an individual company that's very small, maybe only 10 or 20 employees, or whether you have 10,000 employees, you still have to hit payroll. So you still have that same, how do I pay my employees? All over the spectrum.
So, Jonathan, that's fascinating. I don't think a lot of our listeners probably knew that SAP had, services and products that dip down to companies, that small, a few $1 million with 10 to 20 employees. So I'm sure that's new information for them. Let me ask you, I know we've been talking a lot about, what happens from a marketing perspective before a sale occurs. But what are your thoughts on what happens after a sale is completed?
I think, Walter, you hit a really interesting point. One of the things that shifted is marketing as an organization has stopped thinking about the selling process and more the buying process. And recently we've recognized, the world doesn't end suddenly when a transaction happens. Marketing's job doesn't end as soon as the customer signs up to become, frankly, a customer. And we've been thinking a lot about what happens from the buyer's perspective, from their point of view. Do they use the software? Do they use the product? It doesn't have to just be software. Whatever product you're selling, do they get any value out of it? And so the phrase we've been talking a lot about is consumption models. How do you consume it? And the analogy with eating is actually pretty strong. If you think about us as human beings, there are lots of different ways we eat. For big holidays, we get family together and we do a big feast. Thanksgiving's probably the best example. Sometimes we eat meals at dinner time. Sometimes, unfortunately, we eat in our cars. Sometimes there's snacks. We often don't eat everything we purchase. Some of it sits in our shelves for a long time and hits that expiry date and we throw out. Some things we eat the same day we buy it. And so thinking about that analogy, that consumption of food and consumption of goods and software is very similar. And we started thinking about, well, how would you support those consumption models? And you might imagine that you want a warehouse-style model, a Costco, for example, for your readers that have one of those, for the times that people want to stock up and buy larger purchases, ones that have a longer shelf life. And if you're in the warehouse business, because that's the audience you're trying to get to, then you might differentiate yourself based on selection. You've got more than the average store has, and you might have a really good return policy. You can return it, up to 3 years later or something like that. On the other hand, maybe that's not your target audience. Maybe you don't want long shelf life items that are more expensive that sit on, that can be used that way. Maybe you're a specialty retailer, and therefore you're going to worry about less common items or maybe new products that aren't available everywhere. And therefore the way you're going to differentiate yourself is based on the knowledge of your staff and knowing more about a specific electronics or a specific industry or a specific business function than anybody else. And
okay,
finally,
Dan, I just got the warning cry there. We got about a minute left. Hey, Walter, why don't you allow our guest to give us his contact information? You go ahead and do the same for you.
Yep, Jonathan, just give the main website, and if you could summarize the three main ideas.
We don't even have that. We have 1 minute, literally 1 minute.
Terrific.
So well, you could, I think, yep. Walter, I would just say, think about the wall of B2C and B2B disappearing fast and accelerating. Think about that marketing doesn't stop at the sale but continues afterwards, and recognize that it's all about personalization. If you don't talk to people, if you only talk to companies, you're missing the boat.
And, of course, you can find out more at www.sap.com or www.bechercommunications.com.
Thanks very much. I'm Kevin Price. Enjoyed it very much. And when we come back, we're going to have a lot more for you right here on Talk 650, powered by CBS Radio.